And now, back to our program.
Ram Dass, one of the chapters in the book, How Can I Help, dealt with listening and how through listening better we can become better knowledgeable about ourselves and also help better. And there were some wonderful stories in that particular chapter to exemplify what it means to listen. But I'd like to hear you talk about why listening is important.
Well, it's a way of countering that kind of reactivity we have about suffering. That the first component is to stop and to hear, to break into the reactivity chain, so that you respond with an appropriate action. You don't react out of your own fear or denial. And what you mediate into that, what you put into that, intersperse into it, is a moment of just listening, of witnessing what is. It's as high a Zen statement as you can imagine, just the statement of noting what is. And when I'm working with somebody dying, like even the word saying somebody's dying is a model in your mind. Actually, all you've got is them breathing on the bed or moving with pain and the shade and the light and you sitting there. And if you say, I've come to help, that's a model you've got in your head. And you've got to keep going behind the models to just get to the bare awareness of what's happening. It's the same thing you would do in meditation. It is a meditative exercise, actually. And then when you hear, and then you broaden out from that narrow circle of what's happening in the room to what's happening in terms of who you are, who they are, what's possible, all of that. Out of that comes an appropriate action. And that appropriate action is touched by wisdom. It comes from the wisdom of like the Tao saying, truth waits for eyes unclouded by longing. It's the kind of truth that comes out of the quietness of the mind. It comes out of a quiet mind. And for example, in dealing with my stepmother's cancer, I find that I can be full of alternative medicine ideas, but she is a good middle-class woman who's grown up in a culture where those are not comfortable ideas for her. And I've got to tune to what she is and what she needs, and then give her support in the work she's doing, not impose my models on her, and yet keep open the possibility that when she wants to listen to one, that's there for her. And that's something where if I were busy being reactive, I'd be very frustrated because she wasn't jumping into alternative treatments like I'd like her to,
Yeah. Reminds me of another of the stories in the book about the soldier and the girl put the flower
Oh boy,
in
that's
the
a
rifle.
powerful story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because everybody remembers that picture, on the Pentagon steps when the girl, the flower child, put the flower into the rifle of the guy from of the Marine. And this is the story of the Marine and how he felt demeaned by what she did, and how his whole life changed as a result of all those kinds of experiences, and how he became part of the Vietnam veterans against the war.
And I think the essence underlying it was that the protester wasn't allowing the space. It was an us and them situation once again, and it wasn't the unity that needs to be present.
And that's part of the dialogue in this book about social action, because so much of the social action, this is where Paul is really wonderful as a co-author, because Paul has done a lot of speech writing for our really good presidential contenders over the past 20 years, Eugene McCarthy and McGovern and people like that, and congressmen. He's had a WBAI talk show for years. And the social action that people do so often polarizes, as we found out. I mean, it was the hippies versus the police, and it was the government versus, and it was all the good guys and the bad guys. And that we are living with the tremendous conservative swing in Reaganism and what it represents, partly because of the impurity of the way we did our game in the 60s. I mean, these are superficial pendulum swings. They're not the deeper rhythms of the society, but they are definitely pendulum swings that we forced. And part of compassionate social action is an appreciation of the opposition and realizing that behind the them is an us, too. And we realize that, I spent a lot of time trying to change with letters and with prayers Caspar Weinberger, whom I disagree with about almost everything. But I must admit that Caspar Weinberger is part of myself, and I'm juicing him up with a part of me that enjoys the affluence of this culture. I enjoy getting on a highway that has no holes in it and driving and having all the little side things that you can have in this culture that you don't have in other cultures. And there's part of me saying to Caspar, go, baby, go. At the same moment, I'm saying, this is disgraceful what he's doing. Isn't it? And I have to face that it's us we're dealing with. It's stuff in ourselves we have to purify. And we have to oppose things we disagree with. I certainly agree to opposition and to protest and all, but there are ways of doing it in terms of the vibrations in your own heart. And my feeling is that a lot of the social action that's been motivated out of, this is a disagreement I've had with Dan Ellsberg recently, in the past few years, that a lot of the motivation in the anti-nuclear movement came out of fear and urgency. And my feeling is the bomb comes out of fear, and when you try to act to oppose the bomb using fear as a motivator, you're exacerbating exactly the cause of the problem you're trying to solve. And I don't think it should come out of fear. And I think that you can do it out of absolute rational, clear compassion for everybody and work to end the nuclear madness without provoking more fear in everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's not just on a national or domestic level. We need to recognize the Caspar Weinbergers in the Kremlin
Of course.
as well,
Oh, absolutely.
that represent us.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that Gorbachev is a very interesting human being. I think he's not that interesting, but I think he's a very hard player, and I would think he's a very wily opponent. And I think you can play a competitive game of tennis with an opponent and fight very fiercely and not let him get away with a thing and still love them. And I think we do it every day in our sports. And we call a good sport somebody that can do that. And we call a bad sport somebody that really hates their opponent.
Yeah, it's a spiritual blessing to have a good
Yeah.
enemy as an opponent.
Exactly.
You can learn from your enemy.
Exactly.
If you don't have an enemy, it's hard to grow.
It is. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. In fact, a lot of people see the negative parts of their life as something that has hurt their growth. And yet if they look carefully, I mean, I get people to look back over the suffering of their life and the conflicts they've had with other people and so on, and they will find that the deepest part of their growth has come through a lot of that stuff, really. Harder though it is for us to admit it. We say, oh, well, that might have been useful, but certainly not this suffering.
Yeah.
And the really conscious person is somebody who can look at this suffering and say, yeah, this stuff is really the juice of growth, too.
Yeah. I wonder what prevents us internally from. There's something inside there that prevents us from wanting or holds us back from really wanting to move into that one, because it's a real unknown realm. It's a realm that where you have to give up any sense of security or attachments that you may have, and really let go into the process.
Well, if you're too frightened of the loss of your separateness, I don't think you can have the space to do that. I think it's with some deeper recognition, which is what this process of awakening is about, the recognition that your identity also comes with your connection with something other than your separateness. Then it allows you to expose and open to the way in which your separateness involves change and vulnerability and negative qualities and so on. If you have your total 100% investment in you as a separate person, it's so scary that you want to do everything for eternality and you want to do everything to avoid anything negative or any risk. It gets very scary for you. And I watch in dealing with dying people, which I do in some of my work, that some of the dying people who have a more expansive sense of self can drop their body so gracefully, and others who have just a total identification with their separate entity are just panicked by the fact that things change. And the quality of form as it all changes, as the Buddha kept pointing out to us.
Yeah, it's certainly a constant factor in one's life.
In every component of life, everything is changing. Can you imagine if your happiness is only based on that it doesn't change? I mean, what are you trying to do? You're trying to push back the ocean with your hands, It's just an impossible situation. And yet people do it all the time. With insurance and with this and with that, feeling, now I've finally beaten it. Now I can feel safe. And then suddenly the electricity goes off, or some dramatic thing happens.
Right. Yeah, it is amazing how we do that. It's so much to learn from if we just look at our own life.
It's all there.
Yeah.
We're all a microcosm. I mean, holography is just really, it's all written everywhere. All of it's written everywhere.
Yeah. I guess we had our first conversation, it must have been 1974, and here we are more than 10 years later. You've gone through some changes, I've gone through some changes, but where are things for you now, personally? Where's your life? What are you doing? How's it working for you?
It's interesting because unless you're asked that question, you hardly ever notice because it's just going on. When I think about it, I can say my faith is stronger than it ever was. I'm happier than I ever was. I'm using less chemical means of altering, like coffee or tea or cigarettes or psychedelics or alcohol or anything, than I've ever done before. I'm feeling very young for a 54-year-old body. I just spent 2 months this summer in Rangoon, Burma, sitting in meditation from 3 in the morning till 11 at night. So I'm pushing that end. I'm also working in service. I live with my father and my stepmother and take care of them, and have people helping do that also. And I'm working with AIDS patients, and I'm working with dying people, and I'm working on the prison project. And I mean, I've got a whole lot of games going. I'm working with aging. I'm starting to teach a course on the wisdom of aging, and my next book's going to be on aging. I feel I'm building a Hanuman temple in New Mexico, in Taos, New Mexico. We've got a Hanuman. I brought a beautiful statue over from Jaipur, India, because Hanuman is that component of Hinduism that represents service as a way of being with God. Hanuman says, when I don't know who I am, I serve you. When I know who I am you, he says to God. And it's that intimate relationship, and I'm part of that lineage. So that's honoring my lineage and bringing that story into the West more. So I've got all these games in the fire, and I feel pretty good about my life. I feel like I'm finally integrating it in a nice way. I think that Emmanuel, my friend who's not embodied, I have a lovely ghostly friend who speaks through a woman named Pat Rodegast. And Emmanuel said to me, he's got a charming sense of humor. When I said, what do I tell people about dying? He says, tell them it's absolutely safe. It's a great line. He said it's...
nothing to worry about.
Nothing to worry about at all. He said it's like taking off a tight shoe, which is great. And I said, what should I be doing, Emmanuel? He said, Ram Dass, you're at school. You created a school for yourself. You took a birth. Why don't you try taking the curriculum? Why don't you try being human? I'd never thought of that. I somehow thought humanity was like an interference with divinity. And now I really realize that my freedom comes through my incarnation, through being impeccable in my dharma. And because I have certain skills and certain family and certain neurosis and certain economic possibilities and all, I live a certain way, and it's not better or worse than you live. It's just my way, and the more I feel my way into it, the more free I feel in it, and that's really what my life's about now.
It reminds me of something that's occurred on this program a number of times in the past, and that is that inclination we have of feeling that we're human trying to become spiritual, when in point of fact it may be that we're already spiritual trying to become human.
Exactly right. That's the bizarre turnaround that I found. That's a big turnaround that happened to me in the past 10 years. A big one. And it's colored everything in my life, so that when I'm taking care of my father, I'm not begrudging it, saying, ooh, if I could only get off to meditation. That the way I take care of my father becomes my means of being with God.
Yeah, and true meditation is every waking moment.
Yeah. Trungpa was right.
When you're asleep, too.
Yeah, exactly. It was like the teacher in Burma would say to me, Ram Dass, did you awaken this morning on a rising breath or a falling breath? Oh, God, I'm a long way from home here.
I'm going to continue my conversation with Ram Dass in just a moment.